Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. It's been a gentle autumn. Not spectacular, but not too cold, not too wet. Summer has just slowly subsided. That's it, really. Winter is inevitable. And I'm dismantling the garden, unravelling it from its summer clothes and putting it to bed. Carol visits a garden with an astonishing collection of Michaelmas Daisies and revels in their late-season brilliance.
It's such a simple, everyday sort of flower, and yet these vivid blues and magentas paint the garden.
We visit a giant veg grower with a scarily large pumpkin.
Why I like growing giant veg is when you get it on the show bench, the mums and dads and the kiddies come round and the kiddies go, oh, look at that. There's nothing better.
And as well as deconstructing the garden, I should be preparing for spring by sowing some broad beans. There's always a tipping point in the garden. Things like the Cosmos Purity are still looking really good. But some borders reach a point where they just look tired and jaded, and you need to cut your losses and say that's it. And that's what I'm going to do here. You can see that the sunflowers are looking miserable. They're all mouldy. There are a few seeds, which we can obviously keep for the birds, but I want to clear away what has done its stuff. And that will create room so I can plant some wallflowers. Ow! Got a thorn in my hand. It always feels a little bit painful to remove plants that have still got some life in them, and the Cosmos would go on producing flowers, but they've lost their heart. And funny enough, the ones in the border behind me, which is a twin border, planted the same, are still doing fine. I wouldn't remove those. But there remains the question, I need space to plant wallflowers, because if I don't get them in the ground now, they won't develop properly and they won't flower for me as I want them to next spring. And I've still got plenty of other things that I won't take out. There's the salvia, there's phlox, those can stay in. But there's room now for me to get my wallflowers in amongst them. So it's a trade-off. I lose a bit of Cosmos and gain a lot of wallflower. Now, a lot of wallflower looks like this at this time of year. And these are really cheap. There were 10 plants for a couple of quid. And I love the way that you can buy them in this old-fashioned way, just wrapped up in damp newspaper. They're a member of the brassica family, so they're cabbages, essentially. And I usually grow them myself from seed, but this year, the ones I grew started flowering in August. And they've been flowering solidly since then. And I suspect that they won't flower for me next spring. So I've bought a batch of seedlings, which is a very cheap, easy way to do it. And you can see that they're grown in soil. And you separate them out, and these are nice, healthy plants. Now, the key to wallflowers, when you buy them bare root like this, is buy them, go straight home and plant them straight away. Don't leave them hanging around, because they will suffer. So I want to get all of these in the ground within the next half hour. Now, there's no special technique to planting them, except to remember that they are a member of the brassica family, so they don't really like acidic soil. So if you've got very acidic soil, that means soil that grows rhododendrons and heathers and camellias easily, it's a good idea to lime the soil a little bit, and you can either buy lime to do that, or if you've got a wood fire, wood ash will do the job as well. So just spread that a couple of weeks before you plant the wallflowers, and that will help them. Other than that, bung them in the ground. It's easy. Now, I've been talking about wallflowers as though that covered them all. These are actually wallflower primrose bedder, and the bedder series is really good. They are reliable plants, They're not the biggest wallflowers you can buy, but they're strong. And what you're looking for when you buy a wallflower is a nice, strong, bushy plant at this time of year. If it's tall and floppy, that's not such a good sign. They have that lovely combination of being an old-fashioned plant. You knew that your grandparents grew them and enjoyed them in the same way, but they've never gone out of fashion. Also, don't forget, wallflowers have one of the best scents of any flower at any time of year. They're used for bedding in a very old-fashioned way, but I like them in a combination with tulips. Wallflowers and tulips are just a perfect combination, coming to their best round about mid-April to mid-May. It's a good idea to get wallflowers in October, if you can, because that gives them a chance to establish their roots while the soil is still reasonably warm. They're tough plants. You needn't worry about this too much. They're not going to die of cold, but you do want a nice, strong plant when you go into spring. It's also a good idea to plant your wallflowers before you plant your tulips. And that is for the most obvious reason of all. It means that you're less likely to dig up the tulip bulbs as you go along. And anyway, I like to leave tulip planting till November. Now, I say that the garden is folding in upon itself, but of course there are exceptions that gloriously break that rule. And Michaelmas daisies are amongst the best of them. Of course, Michaelmas Day is September the 29th, which is when they really hit their stride, and they go on striding without break until they're blasted by frost. And Carol has been to Malvern to see a fabulous collection of Michaelmas daisies.
I love Michaelmas daisies. Just the very sight of them, though, has this kind of two-sided effect. On the one hand, they remind you that autumn's sliding gradually into winter. On the other hand, there's this reprise of the summer, these vivid blues and magentas that paint the garden, and this incredible energy and dynamism that they bring. It's such a simple, everyday sort of flower, and yet that familiarity belies the fact that it has an incredibly complex history. Generations of men and women have devoted their entire lives to its culture, its development, and to ensuring its preservation so that we can grow it in all its myriad forms in our gardens. Nowadays, the charity Plant Heritage help conserve plants like these asters in national collections. Paul Picton and his family look after this one. There are more than 600 experts and enthusiasts like the Pictons, safeguarding the future of our garden heritage by running them. It is an absolute wow, all this scintillating colour, isn't it? It's brilliant.
Well, here you've got a historical collection of all the varieties that breeders in England raised of the Novi Belgii or New York Michaelmas Daisy over a period of 50 or 60 years.
What we all know as Michaelmas Daisies. But...
And love, I hope.
Oh, no, how could you not love them?
I mean, just look at the range of colour you've got in there, the range of shapes of the sprays of the different varieties, and the heights from little short things up to something which might be 5 or 6 feet high.
How did the whole story start?
Yes, it happened very slowly, but it started way back at the end of the 19th century when a man called Ernest Ballard got keen on growing Michaelmas daisies in his garden. And he thought, well, I can improve this plant and turn it into an even better garden flower if I put some work into it.
Yes.
His biggest success was one called Beauty of Colwall, which won an award for him at the RHS trials in 1905.
Ernest Ballard wanted a bolder aster with an abundance of petals. Each new variety he bred, he named after a member of the family. Anita, a simple flower with a pure colour, followed by Ada with more petals, and finally Mary Ballard, the pinnacle of what he was aiming for. But how did the Picton family come to get involved with the Ballards?
Well, it's my father who first got involved. He got offered a job here by Ernest Ballard to come and manage the nursery just after the Second World War.
I suppose those vivid, bright colours were just what people
The bright
needed,
colours, they
weren't
were dying for that after the austerity of the war years. They needed colour.
Yeah. And what is it you love so much about
Well,
Michaelmas
what I
Daisies?
love is the versatility of these plants. You can have the soft colours, which is especially seen in the smaller flowered Michaelmas Daisies, and it's almost as if you can pull down stars from the heaven and put them into these great big clouds in your garden.
Poetically put, the Milky Way come down.
The Milky Way come down.
The next generation of the Picton family has grown up with asters. Helen Picton is taking over the reins from her parents. What's this lovely deep purple one?
This is actually one that my father bred, and it's named for me, Helen Picton, when I was smaller and cuter. And it was work that he was trying to do to get shorter, more compact New Englands, because an awful lot of them are very tall.
Yeah.
There isn't always space for them in people's gardens, so it's nice to try and work towards getting shorter ones.
Yeah. I love Novi Anglii because they're fairly disease-free, aren't they?
Yes, that's their biggest advantage, really, is that they're mildew resistant. They have very few problems. They're good, tough plants, but they're actually surprisingly greedy. So it's worthwhile giving them some form of feed, particularly in the spring. And we find that doing this using a mulch is very helpful. The mulch actually helps reduce moisture loss when we do get a hot, dry summer, which happens sometimes.
Yeah.
And of course, with the Novi Bauges, this is an added bonus in that it helps stop them from getting so stressed. And of course, when they aren't stressed, they are much more disease resistant.
This whole garden extols the aster in all its forms and in these beautiful combinations all around the garden. Here, an old aster, Arcturus, with these deep purple flowers, accompanies a pale pink one. This is Les Moutiers. It's a sort of aster you see rambling around on railway embankments, perfectly at home here, alongside brilliant splashes of rudbeckia. And in the centre, Aster Novi Anglii Helen Picton, a fitting tribute to a wonderful family of plants and a marvellous family of plants people.
At this time of year, there's an awful lot of material coming out of the borders for the compost heap. That's great. The slight problem is a lot of it tends to be quite dry and woody and slow to decompose, particularly as we're going into winter. So this is where a shredder comes into its own. And if you haven't got a shredder, if it's relatively soft material, you could try mowing it. And failing that, a club hammer, bashing stems of sunflowers or cabbages or anything that's really slow to break down, transforms the speed that it turns into compost. Now, one of the ironies here at Longmeadow is we put in paths because the ground gets so wet. And hard paths mean we can wheelbarrows and walk around without sloshing through mud all the time. But great chunks of our paths remain really wet and slippery for weeks, if not months of the year. And that's because they get an algae build-up. And you get that on any surface. It could be a path, it could be a patio, decking, even garden furniture, where you have a wet surface that's in shade for a lot of the time, and then the algae never really disappears. Where we get bright sunshine and hot weather, it more or less all clears up. But as soon as we have a bit of rain, it comes back. And you get this stupid situation of, instead of walking on the hard path, you walk on the grass because it's less slippery. Now, you can deal with this. You can brush on mixtures, some which I've used for years, some which are brand new, some which are organic, some which are non-organic. Brush them on. That will destroy the algae. The slight problem with that is if it destroys algae, it can also damage plants either side of the path. So the simplest way to go about it is simply blast it off. You could do it with a strong hose if you have it, but a pressure washer is ideal. And you don't have to own one. You can hire pressure washers from about 30 quid for a weekend. The beauty of that is it's pure water, not using a huge amount of water either, but getting into every nook and cranny and just simply knocking the algae out the way. I would say pressure washers work by electricity. Electricity plus water plus being outside. Be a bit careful. If you've got a connection of any kind, cover it so it's waterproof. Other than that, it's dead easy. When you're directing the jet, make sure it's at a nice shallow angle, otherwise you simply rip the grouting out in between the bricks or the stones. The other thing is it does make a mess. Water goes everywhere, so just be sure that you've got somewhere for the water to move to. But it works. It feels counterintuitive to add water to a damp path, but that is now nice and grippy. Now, you may not have slippery paths, so you don't need to blast them with a pressure washer. But here are some other things that you can be doing this weekend. Now is the perfect time to apply grease bands to fruit trees. This will stop damage by the caterpillars of a number of different moths next spring and summer. The females can't fly, so they climb up the trees via the trunk. And a grease band, either bought as a band that you tie onto the tree or of grease painted directly onto the trunk, will form a barrier that they can't pass. Chilies are delicious when fully ripe and eaten fresh. However, if you have a surplus, pick the ripe ones as soon as they're ready, and that will encourage more fruiting. And to store them, dry them thoroughly. I use a basket on a windowsill. And then when they're thoroughly dry, they can be stored in a sealed jar and will keep for years. The imperial fritillary flowers in spring and is one of the most exotic and dramatic plants of any season. The bulb is large and has a hole, like a cored apple, running through it. One side is usually flattened, so you plant it on its side like that. Dig a really generous hole. 12 inches isn't too deep, and put plenty of grit underneath it. Place the bulb on its side and then backfill, marking the spot where you planted it, and it should flower for you for the next 10 to 20 years. Come on. Come on, Nigel. Come on, come here. You want a carrot? You may not like it. That's not a very good carrot. These aren't too bad. At this time of year, you often see holes in carrots, which are carrot fly. The grubs hatch out and then feed off the roots. But yeah, you can see there, we've got the telltale runnels. Sometimes they go right through it. But those are fine, and those were sown in spring, so all summer we've been picking these and they're still going strong, but they're not going to win any prizes. These are grown solely for taste. However, there are a group of vegetable growers that passionately compete in growing the biggest vegetables they possibly can. At this time of year, of course, it's pumpkins that dominate that scene. And we went along to Wellingborough to see a giant pumpkin unveiled, ready for competition.
Right, today's the day, folks. Let's have a look what we got underneath here. Look at this little beauty. This plant has been growing now for about 4.5 months, and this is the size we've ended up with. Some of these pumpkins will grow quite a bit bigger than this one. You can see them growing most days. What I sometimes do is I put a cane each side of the growing pumpkin, and you can see the sticks moving apart. Why I like growing giant veg is, first of all, the challenge of being able to do it. And then, when you get it on the show bench, the mums and dads and the kiddies come around, and the kiddies go, "Oh, look at that." There's nothing better. The people that grow the big veg, most of us are pretty eccentric, because I'm afraid you've got to be. Everybody waits for everybody else to come to the shows to see what they're unloading out of the back of their truck. And some are cursing underneath their breath because somebody got something better than they have. But it's just one big happy family, really. With growing this giant veg, you've got to have the right seed. Pumpkins are like racehorses. They've got their own breeding format. When they buy the seed, especially if you buy a seed from America, it can cost $400 or $500 for one seed. But with that seed, there will come a pedigree. It isn't always the biggest is the heaviest. You know, it can be the longest marrow or it can be the fattest marrow, and then you get a little tiddler, put it by the side of it, and it weighs twice as heavy because the skin is twice as thick. One of the things we all say, the weighing scales doesn't lie, the measuring tape doesn't lie. I've got about 15 cabbage altogether growing, and you know, this is just a nice one for you to have a look at. I think this is going to be a showstopper. These are held up by car tyres, because if you didn't, they get so top heavy that they'll fall over and go mouldy underneath, and that allows the air to flow around them so they stay nice and clean. And my main tip with cabbage and most of my veg, I grow them in rhubarb. I'm on the first person to tell you I like rhubarb crumble, I like rhubarb and custard, and I like stewed rhubarb as well. But pieces I don't use, I put the chopped rhubarb in the bottom of the hole, put any fertilizer in the bottom of the hole, fill it back in, then I plant my plant on the top. And the rhubarb rots down and stops any bugs that are in the ground attacking the roots from underneath. 69 centimetres. Yeah, not too bad. With giant beans, it's the length. Put it on the show bench, and the longest one's a winner. And let's hope it's going to be the longest one. All right, yeah. One of the most asked questions is, can you eat them? Which you can. That should do it. The wife says, oh, Clive, go and cut a cabbage. Then I cut it into 4 or 5 pieces, put it into some plastic bags, and then as I'm going up and down the street, I hand a few pieces into the neighbours, so everybody's eating cabbage. There's no way, you know, on God's earth I can pick this stuff up myself. Right, careful now, don't catch hold of that stem. So, when I'm doing the show, I need some help. All right, that's it for now. So off I go, and let's see if we do any good at the show.
Well, big as it was, it turns out that Clive's pumpkin wasn't the biggest in the show, so he didn't win that prize, but he did win others for other vegetables. Now, this time of year, it's traditional to sow some broad beans. And it's something actually I've stopped doing in recent years because they really suffered from the wet and the poor drainage we have here. But now I've got these lovely raised beds, which have done really well this summer. I'm going to go back and give it a go. The reason for sowing broad beans in autumn is not so much because they need it, but because it will give you an earlier picking. So the idea is to sow some now, some as early as you can get on the soil in the spring, could be February, could be March, and then another batch in April or even May. So you spread the broad beans season and you get 3 lots of pickings, and you can use 3 different varieties. But at this time of year, you really do want to go for Aqua Dulce. That is the traditional one. It's hardier and adapts better to the slow-growing, cold conditions that it's bound to find itself in. A really delicate, small broad bean, eaten not really much bigger than a generous pea, is delicious, really tasty, and the texture is beautiful. So to get some in now, so we've got them early, sort of mid to the end of May, is something to really look forward to. And I'm just going to sow a few. So what I'm looking for is just one picking perhaps, just 1 or 2 meals next May, rather than waiting till June for the spring batch to come through. Prepare the soil. The soil here is fantastic in the raised bed. Certainly haven't dug it. There's no need to do that at all. And I'll just pop the seeds in. They're very satisfactory seeds, broad beans, because they're so big. They're lovely pebble-like objects in your hand. And just push them in the ground in rows. We'll mark the rows out like that. And I would just say that if you've got raised beds of any kind, the only really important rule is never, ever, ever tread on them. Because that's the whole point of a raised bed, is to keep the soil nice and open and in good heart. So use a board and just push the beans in. And I would say about 9-inch spacing is fine in double rows. Now, I find that you may have to support each individual bean, because what happens is they grow and then they start to curl and twist and you get these sort of rather wobbly, contorted beans. And particularly if the slugs have had a go at them, where the stems have been weakened, then they're more inclined to bend. So a small bamboo, until they start growing strongly, is not a bad idea. The other problem to watch out for is mice eating the seeds before they germinate. I've never actually had to worry about that here, but I know that they can be a real issue. And I don't know what to do about it. Cats, I suppose. Okay, that's it. That's broad beans in the ground, ready for a delicious meal or two next May. That's the end of today's programme, but we'll be back here at Longmeadow next time. So I'll see you then. Bye-bye.